Welcome back everyone, and I am Kalyani, and we are here to discuss about MEG 5 Block 1 Introduction. In previous session yesterday we discussed about the literature, literary theory, literary criticism. In first unit and in second unit we talked about very important or major figures of classical age like Plato, Aristotle. Then we talked about Sir Philip Sidney, and then we started our unit 3 with understanding of romanticism and modernism, and further we continued with the concept of Northrop Frye's archetypal approach and myth criticism. Then we saw Marx and Marxist thought and theories, and that we ended with Althusser's ideological state apparatus in Marxist theory. Now today we are going to begin our begin our session with structuralism. So structuralism was first actually introduced by cultural anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss in 1950. Structuralism actually looks at the relationship between the various elements within the self-contained, well-organized structure of a text in order to understand the ways or the grammar rules by which text produces the meaning. Then Roland Barthes was the major figure to put up the structuralism in literary studies, who defined it as a mode of analysis of cultural artifacts such as literature, which originates in the method of contemporary linguistics. And definitely when we talk about linguistics, the major figure or the major person which comes out of it is Ferdinand de Saussure, who revolutionized linguistics by declaring that the way language functions is quite arbitrary, in the sense that that there is no obvious correlation between linguistic or the phonetic utterance or unit and the idea or the thing that it tries to refer or want to convey. We are going to understand this very soon now. Well, Saussure also gave the concept of semiology, and since then the semiology and semiotics became the alternative names for the systematic study of science. So for this, Saussure made three significant moves in his analysis of language. Slide change, ma'am. So let me tell you first that these theories which we are discussing about Saussure, he has not written them, but these theories were actually jotted down by his students, which were later published as a book. So coming back to the topic, Saussure made three significant moves in his analysis of language. First of all, Saussure divides the language into two main components, that are langue and parole. Langue is actually the set of rules by which we combine words into sentences, and parole, it is everyday speech where we used words in particular context. Secondly, Saussure proposed a relational theory of language, where firstly he said words existed in relation to other words, and secondly, the meaning of each word was dependent upon the meaning of other words. Therefore, he said the meaning was the result of being able to recognize difference between the words. For example, if I say the word CAT cat, it is CAT cat because it is not BAT bat or HAT hat. So importance here is it is given to the sound produced by these words, by these letters which are collected to at one place to make a word, and the sound produced give it a meaning. The word CAT cat is CAT cat because it is not BAT bat or HAT hat. Even a single replacement of word can change the meaning of it. Single replacement of letter can change the meaning of the word. And the third thing that Saussure suggested, that words and their meaning are not natural but created through repeated use of conventions. The word cat, please change the slide, ma'am. Thank you. The word cat does not naturally refer to the four-legged furry animal of the particular kind with particular habits. It is actually the pronunciation or writing of the word which does not, but it does not evoke the animal. As we can see here, the word CAT cat. Definitely there is no relation with this letter or the word and the particular animal in the picture. Right? So we can associate this three-letter word cat with this four-legged animal because of its long use. We have been using this concept since our younger age. We have been taught like this. So this suggests that there is no real relationship between the word and its meaning. Meaning is attributed through its use by a community for longer use, by a community of language users. Please change the slide, ma'am. The word or signifier is connected to the meaning or the concept thus signified, and they are purely arbitrary in relationship. That is, signifier and signified, they are somewhere, they have no relation with each other, right? If we go to understand the concept, the signifier is actually the sound or the phonetic or the word that we write in alphabets. They are kind of symbols that are written in the way of alphabet, and signified is actually the mental concept behind that word. And when this signifier and signified come together, they constitute a sign which gives out a meaningful conclusion, as we can see in the picture. If I say dog, dog, definitely everyone will imagine a dog in their mind. Now what happened, the signifier here act as a trigger, act as a train, I should say, which actually brings the concept to one's mind who is listening to the word. And what is to in totality, it's constitute to give out the actual meaning of it. So for Saussure, the sound was material manifestation of abstract concept. Words are signs that enable us to understand the concept or the object. And this idea of Saussure was definitely used in other fields of literature too. So let us move to other topic, that is formalism. Well, this formalism is a type of literary theory and analysis that originated in Moscow at St. Petersburg during second half of 20th century. Formalism actually views the literature primarily as a specialized use of language and proposes a fundamental opposition between literary use of language and the ordinary or practical use of language. Okay, so it actually proposes the central function of ordinary language. It is to communicate. It says the central function of ordinary language is to communicate, to audit a message, or to give some information. In contrast, the literary use of language is not to convey information by just making extrinsic reference, but to offer the reader a special mode of experience by drawing attention to its own formal features, that is, to the qualities and the interrelationship of the linguistics. Right? So let us move to another important figure, that is Mikhail Bakhtin. Now, Mikhail Bakhtin was a Russian thinker, and he was also known for his theory of novel, where he gave the concept of dialogism, polyphony, carnival, and also gave about the concept of heteroglossia. Bakhtin state that his principal object in the essay Discourse in the Novel is to overcome the divorce between an abstract formal approach and an equally abstract ideological approach of study of verbal art. Actually, Bakhtin's point here is that the traditional stylistics have ignored the social dimension and so of this artistic discourse, which has been treated as a self-subsistent phenomenon. It was like a cut-off from the broad historical movements. He gave importance to the language, saying that verbal signals or words are instrument of revolution. These verbal signs, he even criticized many of the poets in his times, that saying that they are trying to put these words in the form of ideology, saying that man is like this because it is made to be like this. That we just studied yesterday itself. So let us move to another concept of feminism, feminist theory, and feminist criticism. So feminism is both a political stance and a theory that focuses on gender as a subject of analysis when reading cultural practices and as a platform to demand equality, rights, and justice. Well, the key assumption is that gender roles are predetermined by the society actually, and especially the women are trained to fit into these kinds of roles. So when we come to distinguish between the feminism and feminist theory, then it would be like feminism is definitely a stance, a political position, and feminist theory is philosophical and analytical approach that employs this political position to read cultural practices like art or literature. And when it comes to feminist criticism, it looks at the text from the feminist point of view. Well, this all discussion about feminism and feminist theory, all this actually began with the time of Aristotle, who said that female is just a female by virtue of a certain with some lack of qualities. And this was also continued. Even G.M. Hopkins, he too in his work, A Room of One's Own, talked about the male dominance in the society, as well as in literary works. But it was Virginia Woolf who tried to change all these thoughts of her with her own writings and advocacy. Another important figure, Mary Wollstonecraft, through her A Vindication of Rights of Women, rejected the established view about women, saying that women are not naturally inferior or weaker part of the society. They are not inferior or lower than any men in the society. And in this series, another important person is Ellen Showalter, who described the shift of focus from androtext or books of men to gynotext or books by women. Actually, she also proposed the theory of gynocriticism. Gynocriticism has sought to uncover the particular modes of women writings by posting women's experience as being the center of both writing and criticism. So let us move to another topic, that is post-structuralism. So post-structuralism designates a broad variety of critical perspective and procedures. Approximately in the 1970s, it displayed structuralism from its prominence as the radically innovative way of dealing with language and other significant systems. Then, well, around 1960s, literary critics and philosophers began to rebel against this system of structuralism. And slowly, post-structuralism became expression of the sense of disillusionment, which emerged as a shift away from what the prominent thinkers saw as a formulaic, ordered work of structuralism. That is, structuralism was completely an formulaic word. It was based on the formulas. But whereas post-structuralism, it actually cancelled these type of strict rules formed during this structuralism process. And here it was Peter Berry who in his beginning theory says, read the text against itself, and this practice will uncover various layers of the meaning embedded in the text. Actually, he wanted to say that this kind of reading will help us to analyze the similarities of sound. From this, we can explore more meanings of the words. We can understand metaphors used in the text. We can relate to the text. And even Roland Barthes, who was one of the prominent figure of this structuralist formulations, later he too moved his work away from the structuralist phase. And he was the one of the first to start speaking about the openness of the text, the text connection with other text, the reader's role in production of the meaning. And further, another prominent figure, Jacques Derrida, in his paper on structure, sign, and play in discourse of human science, attacked the systematic, quasi-scientific pretensions of strict formation of structuralism by asserting that the notion of systematic structure is supposed to have fixed center, that is supposed to have a perfect or organic structure. But instead, what happened? Structuralism itself escapes structurality. And this leads us to another important topic, that is Jacques Derrida. Jacques Derrida, he was a French philosopher and was the founder of deconstruction. According to Derrida, a way of deconstruction is the way of criticizing not only both literary and philosophical text, but also political institutions. Well, talking about Derrida's early works, actually his early works were built upon Saussurian notions of language and signification. But he actually took them to the radical extremes. He argued, if the relation between signifier and signified is arbitrary and all language is rational, then the process of reading is a movement from one signifier to another. Right? He explains with the word cat itself, where he say, where for the cat, for the particular animal we say cat, we use further terms for the cat like animal, organism, whiskers, which shows more signifiers are in the chain of signification. Therefore, there is no final signified, because even that signified will consist of more words or signifiers. That is, it is not fixed. Then he even rejected the idea of semantics. The basic idea is that every word contains and evokes every other word by association, because of which meaning of every word will always differ, referring to the circumstances. Actually, this we can say is actually the ambiguity. It is an ambiguity is always present. We can never tell exactly what someone wants to mean, but somewhere, as if I'm speaking, still people are getting yes what I am speaking. That is, people are eventually understanding the meaning of the words that are being delivered to them. So according to Derrida, there is always a tension between opposites and there is no central meaning of holding it together. And this thing led to the formation or led to the beginning of concept of deconstruction. So talking about deconstruction, deconstruction is a form of philosophical and literary analysis that questions the fundamental conceptual distinctions or oppositions. And in Western philosophy, it is a close examination of the language and logic of philosophical and literary text. Actually, deconstruction is about taking things apart or away from each other in order to study how and why these things came together in first place, how these things were collected in first place as they are. So why they are at this shape if they are at this shape, and whether it does it make any sense. Well, if I break these words, will it make any sense? Will it make any difference? So deconstruction, if we seek a simple methodology in its practice, is thus interested in how text break down. It says deconstruction is interested in how texts repeat their stated aims and purpose, how they rely on false or unsustainable oppositions, how the texts are making use of figurative language like literary or metaphoric. Can the text reverse their own arguments? How a particular text depend on other text or signs? Does the text conceal arguments that are very opposite to what they ostensibly show? So here we can now understand if structuralism was interested in how the meaning was produced and the text words and the text works, then deconstruction is interested in contradiction that resist the meaning. In saying deconstruction says how the texts do not work but deconstruct themselves. Right? So let us move to another important person, that is Michel Foucault in this series. Michel Foucault, he was a French philosopher and historian, one of the most influential and controversial scholar of the post-World War II period. Like Derrida, Foucault did not believe that there was a central meaning that hold a word together, nor did he believe the idea of absolute knowledge. Rather, what he said, that meaning and knowledge exist, not in knowledge, but in society, and are tied up with the power relation. To be more confined, he even said that what we understand or accept is like a knowledge, and the truth are actually constructed. So if you remember in Marxist theory, we read about this, that knowledge is absolute knowledge or the absolute truth is the absolute. And when we see to the comment of Derrida, he is saying that knowledge is something that we make by our understanding and truth are actually constructed. So we can now understand the knowledge way back from the Marx. We find that all knowledge is kind of dependent upon some sets of circumstances. And those circumstances are further offered by social or economic or cultural factors. And if an individual has good knowledge, then he or she can lead a good life. We have, and for this reason, Marxist theory also talked about the institutions like education system, like law system. But when it comes to Michel Foucault, he does he does not believe about the absolute or universal universal or in general considering discourse as a crucial human activity. Foucault used discourse mainly to analyze the power struggle within the real world. And Michel Foucault Foucault's first book was Folie et Déraison. That has been translated in English as The History of Madness and Civilization, and this established him one of the major intellect. And from his writings, we can very well get that he was more keen to historical dimension of change in the discourse. Change the slide, ma'am. So, since Barth in his essay, The Death of Author, talked about authors as the subject who stands outside the text and pour meaning to it. According to Barth, the author are concerned as they are Borgia's fiction. At this point now, Foucault approaches the issue of the author and authorship very differently. He possesses the question that even if we agree that author as a subject is merely a Borgia's fiction, then why such fiction is necessary? In other words, or in more simple words, if author is required as a concept within certain specific social, cultural, and political milieus, then what guides that requirement? Or in the more simple way, why do we need an author? So Foucault also answers this question by telling us that the name, first of all, the name of the author represents a special kind of proper noun which shows author's designation and description. For example, if I say any one of the author's name, just St. Coleridge or William Wordsworth, so definitely when we speak out or we pronounce their name, definitely we think of the ages when they were, think of the period they were, think of the poetries they have written, right? Then secondly, he says that author's function as is as a text, which author's function as a text help us to characterize the thoughts of the author in making the text. That is, it is all about author's imagination, author's thought that help us to understand different text or perspective. Okay, now let us move to another part, that is ideas of sexuality by Foucault. Now, Michel Foucault, in his work The History of Sexuality, has theorized sexuality as located within the structures and discourse of power. For the first time, he was the one able to provide a concrete approach to the so-called natural marginalization of queer sexuality by arguing that certain forms of sexuality were constructed as unnatural, and even in their practitioners were under surveillance. Foucault, what he did, he shifted sexuality from the domain of pure body to discourse and culture. He pioneered queer theory, and this queer theory talks about the treatment of the different sex people in the society, in the writings, in the text. This queer theory actually, it is majorly related to the cultural studies. Foucault's work located sexuality within the discourse of medicine, religion, and law. He demonstrated how definitions of normal sexuality emerged through demonization of homosexual relationship. So let us move to another concept of Deleuze and Guattari, that is actually the psychoanalytic concept. In 1980s and 1990s, Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari produced a series of work where they combined psychoanalysis with post-structuralism, studying the operations of power, capitalism, and the psyche. So Deleuze and Guattari, they developed what they called schizoanalysis. They attached these two words and said it's schizoanalysis. When we talk about in reference to the literature, psychoanalytic criticism explore the language of unconscious, of this repressed and the hidden as embodied in the literature or cultural text, such as art of fiction, with particular attention to repression of sexuality and its desires. Now, Sigmund Freud, who looked upon this such kind of artifacts and saw them as repressing something other than themselves. He discussed about the ancient Greek play, that Sophocles' Oedipus, which according to him shows the desires of human lives. So again, this Oedipus theory came up with, and this Oedipus theory is in which we know about that where the king Oedipus, who killed his own father and married his own mother without being aware of the truth of his own life. And this thing, from this text, he actually related and showed, Sigmund Freud, he related and talked about the human life desires. But Deleuze and Guattari in Anti-Oedipus begin by looking at the structure of desire. They argued that the attempt to create an ego in the schizoid leads to sickness. Actually, they wanted to say, if it goes to too much of desire, no, I want this, definitely it is a kind of sickness. That is, they are trying to convey through their word. So for Deleuze and Guattari, desire is productive force. It is energy which extends and includes everything. It knows, it understands no border. It is desiring production. A kind of lack is created, and which is actually planned through social production. Very simple way, if I say, all of us are students, all of us are studying our MAG so that we can get good marks. So somewhere we can relate this theory, or maybe or not. So at this note, I will end this unit 3 session, and we will move to unit 4. Thank you, everyone.